all of the major heads of the hydra of wokeness are being lopped off one by one.
I'm not convinced. I'll make the case against you.
Yes.
That it can go dormant and then re-emerge. Two key very woke things, in my opinion. Emily Maitlis accused Rupert Lowe, the now independent MP, of being racist.
Are you telling me there's no issue?
I'm telling you that you are focusing on Pakistani grooming gangs because probably you're racist.
She was flustered. She was angry. And she couldn't contain the anger.
The rape gangs is a really important one because this is where political correctness literally kills.
They don't like a work of art, they'll slash it with a knife. They don't like a comedian, they will have the show cancelled. They have a visiting speaker at university, they close it down and they've made a choice for you. This is not about compassion, it's about quite the reverse. It's about cruelty, it's about legitimising bullying, it's about control. But the word Islamophobia conflates that already criminal behaviour with someone who just criticises the religion of Islam, which is everyone's right, because it's a belief system, and you can't ring-fence a belief system from criticism or ridicule. Someone's on trial for burning a Quran, but that's his book.
Kneecap, the Belfast band, they are under investigation. Do you think it's illiberal that we prescribe support of a group like Hamas?
Okay, that's a very interesting question.
Before you hear from Andrew Doyle, I ask, if you want to support this show, all you have to do is press subscribe. If you do that, I can have more phenomenal guests like Andrew exploring the issues you want to hear about and the mainstream media don't touch. And if you want to hear an extended conversation between me and Andrew, where we go into more juicy topics even than that discussed in the video you're about to watch, head over to winstonmarshall.co.uk. But without further ado, Andrew Doyle. Andrew, let's tuck right in. Congratulations on your new book, The End of Woke.
Thank you.
I'm not convinced, but before I push back and explain why I don't think this is the end of woke,
Yes.
why don't you make the case that this is the end of woke?
Well, firstly, I will point out that there is an implied question mark in that title. As you all know from the book, it's not as definitive as all that. I'm talking about if this is the... Certainly, I think I'm going to make the case that woke is, in its current manifestation, what it has been, is now coming to an end. It's not going to be the same again. It might, however, metamorphosize into something else, something similarly ghastly. And the book is, I suppose, making the case that the last 15 years of the culture war is dying off. We are moving into some kind of new phase. We don't necessarily know what that might be. The case that I make is that woke is simply the latest iteration of the authoritarian impulse that is innate in all humankind. And this can emerge throughout history from the left, from the right, from absolutely everywhere. It just so happens that in the last 15 years, it's come from this particular group. Oddly, an authoritarian group that positions itself as the underdog and the victim. So that's quite a new iteration of what we have seen previously throughout history. Nonetheless, that's, I think, going. There are all sorts of signs that wokeness in its current form has lost its clout. For instance, the Supreme Court ruling that says that sex in the Equality Act means biological sex and that you can't change sex by waving around a certificate. The Caste Review, which I know we've spoken about before.
Yes.
Which has been a major blow to the woke movement and the gender ideologues. Similarly, the Labour government now banning puberty blockers, the NHS banning puberty blockers off the back of the Caste Review. Major things like this are rippling out. The DEI is being demolished in all sorts of major corporations, the big ones like McDonald's, Walmart, Facebook, even Zuckerberg has said this. The election of Donald Trump, which has involved various executive orders about reinstating what it means to be a man and a woman, getting men out of women's sports, returning meritocracy so that we don't have this race-based obsession where people are hired according to skin color. In other words, all of the major sort of heads of the hydra of wokeness are being lopped off one by one. And there's also little signs, as you know, like arch leftists quietly removing the pronouns from their bios on social media and pretending that they never had them before. All sorts of things. At the same time, you are, like a cornered rat, you do get a fight back from a dying animal. And that is what we're seeing. There's a lot of doubling down going along amongst woke ideologues. So I suppose if I were to summarize what I'm arguing for in the book is that the culture war has never been about right versus left. That is a misapprehension and a misinterpretation of what it has been. It's always been about the conflict between liberty and authority, as posited by John Stuart Mill in On Liberty. Yeah. So once understood within that framework, what we realize is that we're dealing with the emergence of authoritarianism in one form or another, something we have to be eternally vigilant against, particularly because, as I argue in the book, it's the natural default. That freedom, liberty, social responsibility, all the things that I argue for, are not the normal state of affairs. Those are aberrations. If you look globally, if you look transhistorically, if you look cross-culturally, free speech, freedom, liberty, all these things are very rarely valued and certainly rarely enacted by the state. So my case is that the battle is not over. Complacency is not an option.
Mm-hmm.
But this very specific movement, you know, that has its origins in a combination of the French postmodernists of the 1960s and the Frankfurt School, this identity-obsessed authoritarian movement, this particular cultural revolution, which had its tipping point around 2020 and is now, you know, long past. I mean, all the studies are showing how much support for this is in decline. This top-down movement, which never had more than 8% of the population support at any given time anyway. So it was a top-down movement imposed against a public that were being subdued.
Where'd you get that 8% number from?
It's a more in common study. And I've cited it in the book and actually footnoted it, the specific, where you can specifically look at. So it's in they looked at the US and the UK. So they've outlined what they mean by wokeness in terms of this.
I'm surprised by that number.
I'm surprised. I'm not, because I've always known that this has been a minority have supported this in any, not just in the population, but in any given generation. Like people have always tried to mischaracterize it as the young versus the old people failing to keep up with modern trends. But the majority of young people have never liked this. I suppose because of social media, we've been given the illusion that this movement is more popular than it is, but also because it has infected the institutions of power.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when you had a situation where all of the major corporations, all of the governments, schools, the NHS, quangos, civil service, media, most certainly, the arts industry, you and I both know very much so. Once all of those things are captured, and remember, those are the things that are run by the most privileged in society, the people within the 8%. It never caught on amongst the working class. You know, people who are struggling to feed their families don't care what your pronouns are, and they never did. And so it was something, I believe, that was always destined to fail in a democracy that is functioning, because ultimately people would find a way to get rid of it. It was tricky, wasn't it? Because particularly in the UK, where both parties, both the Tories and Labour, are infected with wokeness, so you couldn't vote it out. And even if there was a third party that emerged, which was anti-woke, you'd still have the civil service, the machinery of government, enacting woke policies behind their back. You'd still have the quangos like the College of Policing. Remember that the College of Policing, which is the group that train police in England and Wales, and who arbitrarily introduced non-crime hate incidents in 2014 with no government mandate to do so whatsoever. It was simply because it became an activist body. Remember that successive Home Secretaries, 2 Home Secretaries, ordered them not to do it. The government was saying you cannot do this. The High Court told them they couldn't do it, and they still carried on doing it. That's what happens with this kind of movement. It doesn't require, it thinks it's above the law. It thinks it can impose its values on the rest of the population. But like I say, the studies do tell us that it's always been a minority of people who've ever supported it.
Right. So you took the wind out of my sails on one of my arguments, which is that just as I believe wokeism was a sort of transmogrification of Marxism into a new identitarian, extreme progressivism, then yes, it can transform again, and we will. Of course, I think we will see it transform again. So that I'm glad you make mention.
And to say your point is right insofar as this does derive from what they call the cultural turn within Marxist thought, where they substituted money and the economy and class for group identity and that sort of thing. Once that cultural turn had shifted, then it's difficult to say that this is a Marxist movement in any serious sense of the word, but it is a Marxian movement. It is something that has the DNA of Marxism, but applies that template to another.
This is a key tenet. It's the identitarianism aspect.
So important.
Different groups, oppressor, oppressed.
Exactly.
That paradigm.
That's absolutely key, yes.
Okay. So you also, fair enough, you make a case that maybe most people aren't actually woke, but those who are actually hold positions of power, and that's why it might continue, and that's why I think it might also not be the end of woke. Let me make the case then why I still think the woke still might have legs with it.
Yes.
So this will apply to the people in positions of power.
Yes.
But last week we saw Emily Maitlis accuse Rupert Lowe, the now independent MP, of being racist for pointing out that the grooming gangs or the rape gangs are predominantly Pakistani background. She cherry-picked some data from the Metropolitan Police, I think it was, ignoring, of course, as you describe in your book, the J report, ignoring the Quilliam report that found that 84% of perpetrators are of Pakistani background, Quilliam themselves being Pakistani British men. So we see again, and this is the rape gangs is a really important one, because this is where political correctness literally kills. Because there have been victims,
absolutely,
people have lost their lives because of this failure to call things what they are, and I think that is a fundamental aspect of woke. And seeing Emily Maitlis of the newsagents, who are, it's hard to tell quite how popular that show is, because they get a lot of money poured into it to push it out. But it seems like it's respected in liberal elite circles, right? So,
yes.
No.
Do you want me to address this particular one before you go on to?
Yeah, sure. Let's do that. Address this one. Address this one.
I mean, I don't mind either way. I think what's very interesting about that interview, and I saw the clip.
Now, a quick interruption from our sponsor, Ground News. We specifically partnered with Ground News because their app and website help me and my team cut through media bias and get the full picture on any news story. Let's take a quick example. How the media is covering Trump's big bill of tax breaks and program cuts. Left-leaning Rolling Stone ran the headline, GOP lawmaker who owns a gun shop takes credit for silencer tax breaks. Now let's turn to Ground News to see how the rest of the media is covering the story. There are multiple articles published on Trump's bill, and we can access every single one through Ground News, complete with source context and a breakdown of key information. Meanwhile, right-leaning The Blaze ran the headline, Trump's big beautiful bill narrowly passes the House, notching another win for Johnson. A very different narrative from Rolling Stone. Seeing all sides, regardless of political lean, is essential for making informed decisions and spotting media bias. That's why Ground uses blind spot feed, which highlights stories underreported by either side. It's such a powerful tool. I genuinely believe in what Ground News is doing, and I encourage you to check it out by scanning the QR code or visiting ground.news/Winston. If you subscribe through my link, you'll get 40% off unlimited access. Ground News is subscriber funded, and by supporting my sponsors, you are supporting this show. Now, back to the interview.
And to be fair, I didn't see the whole episode, but I saw that 3-minute clip, I think, where she accuses him of being racist. 3 minutes was enough for me to see that she was very much on the back foot. This wasn't like she was when she was on BBC. She was flustered. She was angry, and she couldn't contain the anger. And she was antagonistic in a way that I think if she was looking at it objectively when she was on Newsnight, she would say, I've actually failed at my job there. There is a sense in which the racism accusation, it doesn't work anymore. It's stopped working. For a while it worked. I think going back about 7-8 years ago, that could ruin someone's career. That could even be an effective electoral tactic. But it doesn't work anymore. I mean, in the last US general election, you had both sides calling the other fascist. No one was interested. So it just didn't make a difference because everyone knows that's nonsense. So when she did that, it smacked of desperation, and I think it's been received as such. I think rather than suggesting, sure, I agree with you that there are going to be people like that who are going to cling on, that are still in that woke world, and they think that throwing out the racist allegation still has traction. And I think they're about to be very clearly disabused of that notion.
What, because of the pushback they're going to see?
I mean, you've seen already. I mean, how many cheerleaders have you seen for Emily Maitlis? And I admit that, of course, when we're on social media, we're often reading our own from our own circle. But I haven't seen many people say that she came off well there. I haven't seen many people say, yeah, actually he is.
Yeah, but I suspect her opinion is held widely in the country. It might not be a majority view anymore, but I suspect middle-class, liberal, globalist, universalist types would think, yes, she's right to say that.
Maybe. I mean, certainly, I'm not sensing that from one. I mean, Starmer did a very similar thing, of course. Starmer said that politicians raising the spectre of the rape gangs, that they were jumping on a bandwagon of the far right. Mm-hmm. And again, that's a technique that might have worked 5-10 years ago. But the pushback,
But
no one
they're
took
still
that
doing
seriously.
it.
They're still
Lucy Powell, the
Yes.
Labour MP, and you've written about this. When she was on a panel with Tim Montgomery recently,
Yes.
a conservative, and now he's a backing reform commentator. He brought up the rape gangs, and she said, "Oh, it's a far right dog whistle."
Exactly.
Right, but they're still doing it.
They're still doing it, and I think they will always still do it. And I think the woke will still do the things that they've always done. I think what's changed is that they won't get the traction that they once got. I think people are no longer, and I'm sensing this more and more, and I'm seeing more evidence. People are no longer intimidated by it. The very fact that a lot of people are having these discussions now, the very fact that people are expressing opinions that 5 years ago they would have been too terrified to say. I've known of people who, during the sort of heady midst of the culture war, were sending me messages saying, "I'm glad you're saying the things you say, but I hope you understand that I can't say them."
Mm-hmm.
I now see those very same people saying them quite openly, quite explicitly, because they know that the allegation of racism, homophobia, transphobia, whatever it might be, whatever phobia you want to throw around the place, it doesn't really work anymore, and people don't take it seriously anymore. And they see those allegations thrown around, and they ignore them. But, it doesn't have the power that it once had. That to me suggests
the popular power.
Yeah, I've never suggested, and I'm not suggesting in the book that the woke will give up and say, right, we've lost, let's move on. I don't think that at all. I think they'll actually exacerbate and try and do what they're doing all the more. I just don't think it'll work.
Right. So let me continue to make the cases where woke lives on. Let's talk about the Labour government. Two key, very woke things, in my opinion, is the APPG definition of Islamophobia.
Yeah.
It is not just the Muslim vote that want this pushed through, but it's also who I don't think one would call woke necessarily, although there are people like Sir Sadiq Khan, our mayor, who I think is a woke Muslim. But it is the case that this is spearheaded by Angela Rayner, and they want to make it illegal to critique even the religion of Islam.
Now, they've argued they're not trying to make it illegal. But of course, as you and I both know, they are laying down all the groundwork in order to do so. The all-party parliamentary group that you mentioned concocted this definition of Islamophobia. Remember, we need to remember that the word itself is something that was popularized by mullahs in Iran back in the 1970s.
Is that right?
Yeah, this is something that was deliberately known, that if you could turn this into a phobia, if you could pathologize people who criticized Islam as being bigots. This is why there's been this weird alliance between the woke and Islamists. This is why when the Batley Grammar School incident happened, you heard the protesters borrowing from the lexicon of the woke. They specifically said, "We are now unsafe. You have made us unsafe by offending us."
Yes.
The Muslim Council of Britain used the same thing. The teacher had put people at risk. Physical risk. Right, so they're doing the same tactics. It's because they know it's effective in this culture. The definition of Islamophobia, which has always been a nonsense word, it's a neologism where really what you should call it is anti-Muslim hatred, which can be a thing insofar as someone who goes out and targets someone, physically attacks someone if they're wearing a hijab, for instance, or vandalizes a mosque because it's a mosque. This is anti-Muslim hatred, and I think that's a fair classification of that. But the word Islamophobia conflates that kind of already criminal behavior with someone who just criticizes the religion of Islam, which is everyone's right, because it's a belief system, and you can't ring fence a belief system from criticism or ridicule. So it conflates all of that together. The definition that both the major parties agreed on was that Islamophobia was a form of racism against Muslimness or perceived Muslimness. What the hell does that mean? But also, it's not racism. It can't be, because Islam is not a race. It encapsulates many ethnicities, many races. It can't be a race. So it's factually wrong as a definition. But it's also, of course, laying the groundwork for censorship. That's exactly what it's doing. Now, Labour will claim that they will never outlaw. They're not going to reintroduce blasphemy laws. They're never going to outlaw criticism of Islam. But they have, haven't they? Because someone's on trial for burning a Quran, burning his own copy of the Quran. Wasn't anyone else's.
This is the guy from Manchester.
Yeah, but that's his book to dispose of as he sees fit.
Right, and so this brings me neatly to another, I would say, tenet of wokeism, which is the kind of post-colonialist, pro-Palestine, anti-Israel. We're seeing these marches quite regularly.
Yeah.
Now, you said just then that there's the woke and the Islamists have kind of joined forces, or
marriage of convenience.
A marriage of convenience. But I think it's more than that, because there's a philosophy, a deeper philosophy. If you look at sort of Orientalism by Edward Said, and this idea of the oppressor-oppressed has been applied to what's going on on the world scale, with the Muslims in the category of oppressed and non-Muslims, or more specifically white Christians in the category of the oppressors. So it's not just a recent thing. I think it goes back even further than the 70s.
And they have a lot in common insofar as they are both authoritarian movements that believe that anyone who disagrees with them needs to be quashed. So they do have a lot in common. What I think the Queers for Palestine don't understand, and I balk at saying it because it's such an obvious point, is that they would be the first to be killed under a caliphate. And the fact that they can't. There was the quote, I've quoted it in the book, from a Muslim Girl magazine, which talks about how the Prophet Muhammad was an intersectional feminist who wanted to promote diversity above all. I mean, this is insane.
Yeah,
right. It's nuts.
So you say that Labour say they don't want to outlaw it.
They claim they don't.
Who said that they don't?
I've never seen a claim from Labour saying that they do want to introduce Islamic blasphemy code.
But they're reviewing the APBG definition.
Yes, they are. But they're claiming that they're doing this in terms of, I suppose, how would they put it, hate speech laws, to enhance hate speech laws.
But there's been no attempt to delineate, like we've just done in this conversation, Islam from Muslim.
That's the problem. That is the problem. I mean, and irrespective of what they say now, firstly, I don't believe them. But secondly, even if their intention is merely to, I suppose, clarify one of the protected characteristics in the Equality Act or something of that kind, you're still creating the conditions within which blasphemy laws can be reintroduced by a future government. I mean, one thing I would say, because I think we're entirely on the same page in terms of we both see the excesses of the woke continuing and flourishing, particularly because we have a woke government, an authoritarian government at the moment that is in power and will be in power for another few years. But what I would say is that this phase of the culture has been going on probably since around 2012, 2013. That's when everything sort of spikes. If you look at the sort of the records of the frequency of
2012 is when it spiked.
Not spiked. Sorry, when it sort of kicked off. Phrases like toxic masculinity, problematic, or the buzzwords of the woke, white privilege, etc. Those start escalating hugely around that time. It's sort of around the same time where we see those kind of activist contingents gaining real traction within major institutions and bodies and charities and all the rest of it. It's when the progress pride thing really sort of ramps up. It's when Black Lives Matter really ramp up. All the things sort of happen at the same time, around that time. It really explodes around 2020 with the George Floyd death and the riots that ensued as a result of that.
And COVID, lockdowns, all of that. All of that was
hot mess. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because around 2019, people were saying, is woke dying? Is it coming to an end? And then this thing supercharged it.
Yeah.
But it supercharged it to such an extent that the pushback has really, really dampened it down.
So perfect.
So what I'm saying, sorry, just to make my point is simply evidence of a continued push and salvos from the woke movement have to be put into the context of something that is dying, not something that is dead. As in a dying beast has some death rattles before it goes.
Okay, so then on that, I'll make the case against you that it can go dormant and then re-emerge, which we've sort of touched on that. What we've seen in America since Trump's second inauguration is attack on Tesla vehicles up and down the country. It's not being widely reported in the mainstream media, but we've seen political violence. We've seen the rise of Trantifa would be an example, in a show I've done with Andy No exploring that. I think 4 or 5 people have been killed in the name of this ideology, which is tied with leftism of a sort. So we're seeing a re-emergence of some of the violence we maybe saw 5 years ago. But I'd also add, in the late 80s, we had the first bout of political correctness in the modern conception of the word, and there was a response to that. Famously, Bill Maher had a show called Politically Incorrect.
Yes.
Peter Thiel wrote a book called The Diversity Myth in the early 90s in response to that. Alan Bloom wrote his famous book dealing with all of that stuff, and then it died away.
It did.
And then it re-emerged 20 years or 30 years later.
Yes.
It could also... those ideas were not nipped in the bud then.
Sure. I mean, I think the political correctness movement, the PC movement, was very different from the woke movement. I think it shared the DNA, but I think it was very different.
What are the differences?
Key differences, I think, were to do with when it came to the PC movement, there were excessive moments, where someone got fired for saying the wrong thing, or there was that kind of thing. There wasn't threats of criminalization. There wasn't this kind of mass, there wasn't the social media, I suppose, to do that. There wasn't the mass bullying and intimidation. Mm-hmm. There wasn't being locked in prison cells for misgendering. There wasn't this kind of flagrantly authoritarian stuff going on. What I think PC was a rather gauche attempt to do what we always do as a society, which is to reach a social contract of how what is acceptable and what is not. The problem with PC is there were too many examples of people just taking it too far. So I think that you're absolutely right. I think those ideas then informed what became woke, but I don't see them as the same. Similarly, I mean, you could say that the ideals of the 1960s civil rights movement informed some of the ideals of woke, but I see woke as very much working against those ideals, as I explain in the book. So I think I actually totally agree with you insofar as what I should say is that I call the book The End of Woke. I don't do that to position myself as a prophet or to say this is what I think is definitely going to happen. I'm not Nostradamus or Mother Shipton. What I'm doing there in that book is saying, let's look at what woke has been over the past 15 years. Let's look at all of the signs that this manifestation of authoritarianism is dying away. What might replace it? Or how might this transmogrify, resurrect in the way that you're describing? Mm-hmm. So what I'm doing in the book is exploring all these various avenues, not definitively saying in a Francis Fukuyama kind of way, this is the end of this and nothing else will come. That's not what I'm doing. Okay. I think I also try to make the case, as I've said before, that we are fundamentally dealing with authoritarianism and the authoritarian instinct in humankind, which cannot be vanquished. Yes. Because I see it as innate. So therefore, I think you're absolutely right. It will come back. It has to come back because there's never been an eon in human history where it hasn't appeared. Yes. That's my argument.
Yeah. So an important part of the book is your defense of liberalism. Yes. Not just against woke, but against what is emerging on the other side, maybe from, I know you don't like the left-right paradigm, but the right, which is the woke right and post-liberalism. Sure, yes. Which I'd like to come to, if we may. But I'm going to do just what is possibly annoying and try and get...
You're going to be annoying, deliberately.
Yeah, I'm going to deliberately be annoying.
You're going to goad me, needle me.
So one of the problems we've had, particularly on this show, is I've had several people making this argument, and no one, still now, 5 years on, no one really agrees on what the definition of woke is.
Oh, I can help with that.
Maybe you can. We've had one of the reasons why the woke right has been, the people are disagreeing that even amongst those who are against whatever the woke right is because they don't agree with the woke. For example, Eric Kaufman came on the show and he said woke right's a ridiculous term because wokeism is a left-wing thing, which is actually contradicting what you've already said in this conversation. Whereas James Lindsay has come onto the show and said, no, woke right is appropriate because it's a way of thinking. Yes. And it's the paradigm of thought, the idea of power dynamics and grievance culture, that is fundamental. That's what woke really is, and that's why the woke right is appropriate. I thought it might be useful just to get the Andrew Doyle definition of woke.
Okay. Well, the definition that I give in the book, that's probably the easiest thing to do. I say that woke is, or what we just had, the period of wokeness, is a cultural revolution that seeks equity according to group identity through authoritarian means. That's my one-sentence definition. Now, I also, like in my last book, The New Puritans, I went through the various characteristics of the woke. In this book, I've talked about the various characteristics of what they now call the woke right.
Yes.
And I suppose if you wanted to boil it down, there are some obvious parallels and similarities, such as the propensity for anti-Semitism, which occurs on the far left.
That's the center of the Venn diagram of everything.
It certainly is. And there's various other things. But the key point is this. I've never, and obviously I respect both James and Eric, and this is a debate to be had and a discussion to be had. And as I've said in the book, there are so many varied definitions of woke, from the original traditional definition to the one that it became after it was hijacked by activists. Yes. All sorts of various. The word has evolved, been misapplied. That's why I'm very clear in what I mean by woke in the book. But what I would say is, because I have never seen woke as a matter of left or right, and I've never seen the culture war as a matter of left versus right.
Yes.
I think those are redundant terms, hangovers from the French Revolution that no longer apply because I think they were killed off by the culture war.
Yes.
So, because who can say what left and right is really now? So what I would say is the key, for me, the key aspects of being woke, and it always has been the case, is firstly authoritarianism, the desire to impose your values where it may not be well received. That's it. That's the first thing.
Okay.
That has to be. That's just fundamentally how the woke operate. You know, they don't like a work of art, they'll slash it with a knife, thereby depriving other people the decision of whether they want to see it or not.
Mm-hmm.
They don't like a comedian, they will have the show cancelled. Rather than not buy a ticket themselves, they will cancel it so other people don't get to make the choice.
Mm-hmm.
They have a visiting speaker at university, they don't give the other people the option to make their own choices. They close it down and they've made a choice for you. The authoritarianism is so fundamental to wokeness that and as we know, authoritarians exist on the left and the right and everywhere in between. So that's the first thing. Secondly, that's not just what woke is. Otherwise, we would just use the word authoritarian.
Yes.
It also has to be this monomania about group identity. That is very, very key.
Yeah.
Now, that is not unique to the left. And quite clearly it's not, because we know of ethno-nationalists, white supremacists. We know people who are obsessed with group identity. It's a thing that is apolitical, that transcends political boundaries. So to me, it makes complete sense that you would, if that's how you define woke, which is how I define woke, and particularly this, as James Lindsay has said, this obsession with sort of power dynamics and this sort of Foucauldian grid of power within society and how it operates. This doesn't necessarily map neatly onto a left or right paradigm. It transcends both. So to say woke left and woke right, well, to me that just means, well, there's a woke person on the left, there's a woke person on the right. They both share these characteristics. I think I've been surprised actually at how angry people are getting about the woke right epithet.
I'm not remotely surprised about how angry they are.
I am because it makes sense to me. I suppose if your view of what wokeness is that it is essentially leftism, if that's your view, then you've used that word in order to denote that, you won't like it thrown back.
Exactly.
Right.
That's one reason. By the way, I think it was deployed that way intentionally. It was a word chosen because they knew it would deliberately annoy the people they were calling woke right.
I can't.
Because there's nothing more offensive to the woke right than being called woke.
Okay. I mean, I don't know. I'm not a mind reader. I don't know why people, because I didn't invent the term and I don't know who did, in fact. It's been going around for a few years online.
Yes, it has, yeah.
And it's been in various forms. But for me, I had the same thing years ago when I wrote a book called Woke, A Guide to Social Justice in 2018, I think, 2019. And I got a lot of attacks from the left for people saying you're using it as a snarl word. Woke people on the left and the right have never liked being called woke. They've always seen it as a slur.
No. Woke people on the left used to call themselves woke.
Yes, they did, but then they pretended that they didn't. So, for instance, you had Jack Dorsey appearing on stage with a Stay Woke T-shirt, right? Yeah. You had that Erykah Badu song about wokeness. You had also people saying, we are woke and proud of it.
Lead Belly, it goes back to the 30s.
All the way to the Scots Report, exactly. But then you had this revisionism, because they often do this, because their critics started referring to them as woke. They started saying woke is a word invented by the right as a snarl word against us. You had articles in The Guardian explicitly saying this. Forgetting that they themselves called themselves woke up until yesterday. So that was just a technique, right? That was just a thing. So a lot of people do get annoyed about the word generally. But I'm surprised because as far as I can see, I've only ever used the word as a descriptive. I accept that it can be used with pejorative connotations. I've never done so personally. Exactly what you say. I did it as a courtesy. They were calling themselves woke, so I'll call them woke. But of course, because I'm a critic, they interpret it as being a pejorative. That's, right. I think, what happened there.
Now, for sure, it is considered by everyone as a pejorative.
Not by me. I use it as a descriptive.
But if they no longer call themselves woke, don't you think...
Some still do. I mean, there's still some people
apart from
very
Theresa
proud.
May, as you point out, saying that she is woke and proud.
Well, that's it. I mean, so I made that point in the book, is I quote Kathy Burke, arch-leftist comedian, actor, and Theresa May.
I'll always love her because of Kevin Perry Go Large, but that's...
She's extremely talented.
Yeah.
And I'm a big fan. And then and Theresa May, former Conservative Prime Minister, and they both say exactly the same thing. And they both use the identical argument, which is all woke means is not to be racist. Well, if that's all it meant, we'd all be woke. it's not what it means. And you know it's not what it means once you've been dogpiled by people who identify as woke. You know that this is not about kindness. This is not about compassion. It's about quite the reverse.
Right.
It's about cruelty. It's about legitimizing bullying. It's about control. But it's very interesting to me that, I mean, the reason I gave those examples is there's a rhetorical point, isn't there? Obviously, that you're two people who politically couldn't be further apart both agree on this issue, which I hope emphasizes the point that wokeness can't be pinned down to left or right or anything like that. That's the thing. So
just a couple more points then on woke still living on.
Yeah.
One is the Greens. I guess let's say we accept your definition of woke, but in the left wokeism, we've talked about some of these things: colonialism, trans ideology,
environmentalism.
Environmentalism is another key tenet you've touched on with the slashing of the paintings. And Ed Miliband is going full speed ahead in turning the beautiful English countryside into one large solar panel.
Yeah,
that seems to be an aspect where actually wokeism lives on quite happily.
I think the problem is we've got this Labour government now for another 3 years?
Probably? But I don't think it's just the Labour government. I think it's probably commonly held that there is an existential threat from climate change.
Yeah, and again,
I don't think that's something that 8% of the population think. I think probably a majority of Brits think
that. I mean, the environmental issue is a bit different, isn't it? Because that's something that we haven't quite had the debate in the way that we've had with other aspects of wokeness, with other tenets of wokeness. But I think what you do see with the environmentalism is this intention to impose, just as, you know, the girls who went into the National Gallery and threw the paint at the Van Gogh painting, you know, just as they were, you know, because I do believe the destruction of art is always authoritarian. That to me is a similar technique to the Colston 4 tearing down a statue and throwing it in the canal. It's still them saying, we decide on your behalf. Mm-hmm. So irrespective of the debates about the environment and what the scientific consensus might be, all of which I'm not by any means qualified to discuss, what I would say is the fact that we still have this two-party system where both parties are completely infected by this ideology, until that is broken, which I think it might be, until you get a Trump moment in the UK, which I think we might do, then I think the woke stuff will continue to be pushed. However, we've seen with the Supreme Court judgment how things are going, like insofar as the law is now clear. However, you've seen lots of corporations and companies and charities saying we are going to ignore the law. You've had actual lawyers on Radio 4 saying, don't worry, just ignore the law, encouraging people to break the law. Okay? That lawyer, Jolyon Morm, just completely undermining what the Supreme Court have said.
What did he say?
He's been tweeting about this endlessly, talking about how the Supreme Court has been ideologically captured and about how they've got it wrong, and the European who was it who did the summary of the Supreme Court ruling? The Commission on Human Rights,
right?
Who did the summary? He said they have misrepresented the judgment. So there's all these people trying to twist around what the judgment is, but ultimately, what's going to happen there is, I mean, I even saw a school's guidance from a company whose job it is to interpret the law for schools, because obviously headmasters and headmistresses aren't lawyers, and they were misrepresenting the law and telling them to break the law, saying you should allow boys who identify as girls into girls' toilets. That's against the law. What will happen, of course, is that, you know, all of these people will end up being taken to court. They will lose. They will lose money. They will have criminal records. And the receipts are up there. They actually said they've announced their intention on social media to break the law. So, but what that does tell us is that the woke don't give up without a fight. And more than anything is that they do believe that they are the ultimate authority. What they say goes. Mm-hmm. This is why when we had the whistleblowers from the civil service who said, apparently it's quite endemic within the civil service that when the Conservatives were in power and they were trying to implement certain policy changes regarding migration, the civil servants thought it was their responsibility to ignore that, to prevent it from happening, to work within the system, this kind of shadow government, what I think people rightly call the deep state.
Yes.
So I couldn't agree with you more that they are still at it,
right,
and they are still persisting with it, and they are so far gone that they will continue to believe that they retain power as it slips away from them. Mm-hmm. I think it's just a longer process than people imagine.
Yeah. So one thing that I found original in your book, which was new to me, was you write that the end of woke will involve the restoration of the value of democracy. Now, I had never put together that democracy was a part of wokeism.
Yeah.
Even on Brexit, which you explore in the book, there are plenty of Remainers who are anti-woke.
Yeah.
I don't think that to be anti-Brexit is to be woke.
No, I agree.
But so it was interesting to me that you'd put those things together.
Yeah.
Have I misunderstood that?
No, just insofar as the woke impulse is to, as I've just given the example of the Supreme Court ruling, is to disregard the wishes of the people. I've said that at its height, the woke had an 8% supporting approval rating among the population, and yet it became all-encompassing and all-powerful. How? Because it disregards the views and wishes of the majority of the population. As I said, we can't vote out the woke. The EU, I think, is an interesting instantiation of wokeness. Not simply because of its woke policies, which it does have, not simply because of its pro-censorship position, but the fact that the Commission is an unelected bureaucratic body that has huge power and lawmaking capabilities. Now, so that to me is a woke phenomenon. And you can't vote them out. You can't get rid of Ursula von der Leyen. And yet this is a woman who can stand up and say, we want to introduce what she calls pre-bunking as a synonym for censorship. She says it's no good once the misinformation is out there. You've got to inoculate it before it gets there. Pre-bunking, pre-crime, censorship before the impact of the words can get out there and sort of poison society as she sees it.
Mm-hmm.
So all of these things I do think are essentially woke. When Tony Benn asked his famous 5 questions about democracy, the last one, the key one, how do we get rid of you? How do we get rid of you if you're in power? Well, with the woke, you've never been able to do that. They've seized power, inveigled their way into power, and they've done it and no one voted for them. This was not achieved on a democratic mandate, and there was no way to vote them out. And that's why it's been so difficult. And the other reason why I've connected it to Brexit, and you're right, I mean, I've written a section about Brexit, and the reason for that is I think how can I put it? I think the mindset that has enabled wokeness to flourish, which is one that is essentially tribalistic, I think, and it is also essentially a reductive, Manichaean, good versus evil, Disneyfied version of humanity. I think that was supercharged by Brexit. And of course, the concatenation of Brexit and Donald Trump's election in 2016, this key year. And I've described the time before that as the before times, which is a phrase that a lot of people have used. The before time, the time when you could sit in a pub with a friend and robustly disagree and still go for another drink afterwards and it'll all be fine. Those days are gone. And the slightest point of political disagreement is interpreted as malevolence or evil or evidence of diabolism. Mm-hmm. Now, that's the world we live in now. That isn't the world we lived in pre-Brexit.
Yes.
And the reason why I very much know this is that, I was on the comedy circuit and I remember when 2016 came around, I'd written a show for Edinburgh and I was performing it at The Stand, which is a club that almost certainly wouldn't book me now for political reasons because we're not in the before times anymore. Yeah. We're in the after times. And when Brexit happened, I changed my whole show and I rewrote it because I wanted to make the point that I was pro-Brexit at a festival where everyone was anti-Brexit. And I was one of, I think, 5 comedians on the circuit who were openly pro-Brexit at the time. There were more, but they weren't out. All right. I remember sitting in a green room with a comedian saying to me, I hear you voted Brexit. I thought you were meant to be intelligent.
When I read that in your book, I was so livid.
Well, it was
the arrogance.
Yeah, well, that was
anyone might say that. But I remember a few people acting like that. It's just, for me, it's just really disgusting.
Yeah. Yeah. And, friends who no longer talk to me over Brexit, friends who cut me out straight away, friends who started saying, or comedians who started saying I was far right and fascist and all the rest of it. And that's stuck in the comedy world. So it all happened that year. And it was interesting, though, artistically or creatively, doing a comedy show at the Edinburgh Fringe where everyone in the room voted differently to you. And so what was interesting structurally is I had to get them on side for the first half of the show, get them laughing along, get them to like me, and then drop that bombshell. Bit of silence, then you have to win them back by the end of the show. So it's a really interesting way of doing it. In fact, when I did the Jonathan Pye, I co-wrote 2 because I was a co-writer on Jonathan Pye for 3 years. I co-wrote 2 national tours. And for the second tour, we were going to venues that they were all over 3,000 seats. So there was big rooms. And I was always doing the opening set, the warm-up set. They didn't know who I was. They didn't know that I'd written half the show, right? So they didn't know I was, half of the Pie show was mine. So I'm like this stranger coming on stage. And I also knew that they all voted to remain. And so I wanted to do a pro-Brexit warm-up set for an anti-Brexit character. That to me was interesting. So I found a way to do that. That to me has always been an interesting challenge comedically. Because the risk is, isn't it? You can make a joke about, how ugly the Prime Minister is or whatever. You can make a joke about something which everyone's going to agree with and laugh along because they agree. And so much of the worst comedy is people laughing out of endorsement for what you're saying rather than laughing at the joke.
It's clapping.
Clapter, they call it.
Clapter,
It's when they clap rather than laugh. In a way that's unfair because sometimes people do applaud because they find something so hilarious, right? But sometimes they applaud because they just agree.
Yeah.
I think it was Leo Kearse who said to me, because we were sharing a video of one of these really hyper woke comedians. I won't name names because I don't want to be mean, but she's talentless. She's never said a funny thing in her life, right? And but very popular, very popular. She's been commissioned by the BBC. The BBC have foisted her onto people and said, "You will like her." And the funny thing, and we were watching this clip, and you could see in the audience everyone forcing themselves to laugh. Because, this is a minority person. This is someone, she's not saying anything funny, but we must laugh along. And Leo said to me, that's sort of the punishment for being woke is that you have to pretend to like this stuff.
Yeah.
You have to find it in yourself to laugh along to something that isn't funny. That's probably true. I've gone on for a tangent here, but I think it's interesting in terms of creativity and comedy, because the creative world is meant to be about free thinkers. And yet in the comedy industry, at the time of Brexit, there was only one opinion that was acceptable and everything else made you an evil bigot. And so, and you would think comedians had a bit more free thought than that.
That's been one of the very strange things, and I'll continue on this tangent with you.
Yeah.
Because if you look at the personality types in the psychology, it is the case that creatives, and this is what Jonathan Haidt explored with moral foundations theory, and Jordan Peterson's also explored this in his Big Five personality test, that there's a correlation between creativity, or the poet, as Haidt calls him, and having liberal politics, but more importantly, that they are open-minded, and being and high trait openness is affiliated with creativity. So why is it the case that they're not open to new ideas? They're unbelievably closed to these ideas.
Isn't it? It's such an interesting idea. I don't know the answer to that. If you would forgive me, I will posit some suggestions.
Please.
One of the suggestions I would put out there is that I think because within the woke era, I don't think any great art can be created, because I think art is reduced to the message that it sends, to propagandizing rather than creation. And I think therefore acts and comedians, writers, filmmakers, playwrights, etc., are rewarded on the basis of the extent to which they fulfill the creed of wokeness in terms of diversity or in terms of the messaging about power structures that the piece projects. So the woke don't see the Mona Lisa as a work of art. They see it as some daubings on a piece of wood by a straight white man in service of other straight white men. Or I should say white man, because he wasn't straight. But nevertheless, you know what I mean. So they see it as a group identity thing. It's why recently the Shakespeare Birthplace Trust said they were going to decolonize their museum collection about Shakespeare. They were going to add notes to point out that some of the plays are racist and homophobic and disturbing to modern sensibilities. All of that.
Really?
Yeah. That's the Shakespeare Birthplace Trust. The Globe does it. The RSC does it. These are meant to be the custodians of the legacy of the greatest writer who ever lived in the English language. And there they are, trying to get everyone, reducing this genius to the narrow lens of group identity. Those trammels, they can only see the world through group identity. Shakespeare saw the world in a much broader way than that. The abundance of his art cannot be contained if you only look at it through that narrow prism, through those blinkers. Yes. And yet they're doing it. And those are the people in charge. So I wonder whether, if we are in a situation where we are in the cultural conditions, the cultural ideological conditions that cannot produce great art, and in which mediocre and weak propaganda is rewarded, where genuine innovation is punished, then I think what happens is the reason why you're seeing such a lack of free thinking amongst the creative community is that they're no longer really artists.
Yes.
I think that's what it is.
I think there's another aspect, and if you forgive me, I'm going to carry on down this tangent for you. Because
I love the tangents.
This tangent is also relevant to your book. So you mentioned Karl Popper in your book.
Yes.
The famous wartime philosopher whose great war effort was the book, The Open Societies and Its Enemies. Now, you write in the book that Popper would have been against the totalitarianism of the open society, or I think wokeism is the progeny of the open society in a sense. And I actually think you are wrong, and if you can push back on this if you think I'm wrong in my challenge, which is that if you actually look at his tolerance paradox, that he is buried deep in the footnotes of that 2-volume magnum opus that he wrote, it says that incitement to intolerance should be criminal.
Yes.
So even though he says he's arguing against totalitarianism and authoritarianism, also relevant to your book and this conversation, he also says that anyone who incites intolerance, that act, not the intolerance, the incitement of intolerance, should be deemed criminal.
What does he also say, though? He also says that the suppression of dissent, when it can be held up to the checking and balancing of public opinion, would be extremely unwise. He says that, so he makes clear that he's not calling for, he's talking about, remember the context, he's coming out of the war.
Yes.
He's coming out of extreme situations, and he's talking about extreme view, very, very extreme views, the most extreme views, the kind of view that would see people rounded up and put into concentration camps and killed. He's not talking about opinions you don't like. That's not what he means.
But unfortunately, he doesn't do enough to define intolerance.
He doesn't. I agree with that.
And so what happens then is intolerance is really quite literally any type of, even intolerant language.
I think that's right. It fails to define things adequately, and so it has been widely misinterpreted and widely misapplied.
Well, not necessarily misinterpreted. It's a failure of his work.
Sure.
A contradiction in his own work, but he's overseen.
He's very clear that censorship of different opinions would be a terrible thing. I mean, he says it quite explicitly. He does though. I mean, if you could get the text up now, we can have a look at it, but because it's only a short little thing. But he does make that absolutely clear.
Yeah. So he sort of says both. I accept that he says both things.
Yeah.
Which is that, but he also says that intolerance should be criminal. So it's. I mean, it'd be great if he was here that we could actually have the argument.
Exactly.
Which way is it, Karl?
If you approach this and say, well, I interpret anyone who says a man cannot become a woman as being intolerant, and therefore, according to the paradox of tolerance advocated by Karl Popper, I should be able to shut them down and censor them and put them in prison. But that's not what he's saying.
Well, he does say that, and he says you can argue it either way with Popper.
Well, then maybe the utility of Popper is limited.
I think the utility of Popper is limited, and what happened after Popper was that a lot of people clung on to that.
They did. They actually made a cartoon meme of it. But they always missed out that line that I just mentioned, which I'm paraphrasing because I can't remember it off the top of my head. But they always miss that line out. It's very interesting that they do that because it undermines their entire point of view.
Yes, it'd be fascinating to know what he would make of all of this of this period. So we've touched on the woke right.
Yes.
I want a big part of your book is defending liberalism. Before looking at post-liberalism, which I'm also curious about,
yes,
I quite interested in your definition of liberalism, because one thing particularly, and we're being tested in our liberalism with the likes of Kneecap and Kanye West's new single, Heil Hitler, the lyrics of which not only I won't repeat, but I recently found Grok is reluctant to repeat.
Is that right?
Yes.
That surprises
the free speech AI is itself not prepared to tell me the lyrics.
Well, Grok has been slagging me off, so I'm not happy about that. So
Has it really?
Oh, yeah. Someone was asking about, because I did this Titania McGrath tweet, which I rarely do these days, but I did one a few days ago, and it went a bit viral, and someone asked Grok, what's going on with who is Titania McGrath? And they said it's a comedian called Andrew Doyle who is probably attention seeking. So there we go. Rather than trying to satirize the absurdities of our times, no, I'm just doing it for the attention. Thanks, Grok.
So you write that liberalism is not an ideology.
Yes,
it is. What did you say it is?
I said it's the absence of an ideology.
It's the absence of an ideology.
Yes.
I'm not convinced of that.
I know you won't be. Many people won't be. I know that. I get that.
Because liberalism is a new idea. It wasn't natural to man.
No, I've never said it was.
So so how is it that it's not? It's
because an ideology has to be something where there are a prescriptive set of values that you must adhere to. So we know what communists believe. They've got a set of rules. We know what capitalists believe. We know what Christians believe. We know what Muslims believe. These are all...
You literally list the tenets of liberalism in your book.
The tenets of liberalism, as I've listed, as you will know, say that you can do whatever you want. So, I mean, that's not a tenet in of itself. That's the opposite.
You can't do whatever you want. Not if it infringes on other people's...
Well, let's clarify what we mean by that. So, for instance, if the tenets of liberalism said, I have to believe this, or I have to believe that, or I have to do this, or I have to do that, or I have to say this, or I have to say that, then I would agree with you that it's an ideology. It does the reverse of that. It says, it's up to you. Now, I think it's quite a stretch to say that someone negating an ideology and negating the idea of a prescriptive set of rules to live by is therefore in of itself an ideology. I'm just not persuaded by that. That's why there are liberals, aren't there? On the left, on the right, everywhere in between. There are liberals of all sorts of colours, creeds, belief systems. To say that it is an ideology, I think, is to misapprehend the core aspect of it. I make the comparison with atheism. I think when people say that someone is an atheist, it presupposes that there is a God, right? Or it presupposes that the belief in God is the default. That's why a lot of atheists object to the term atheist, because they say there's no word for people who don't believe in unicorns. There's no word for people who don't believe in fairies. So that's why I don't think it's right to conceptualize liberalism as an ideology.
Because illiberalism is predicated on...
Illiberalism or liberalism?
Liberalism is predicated on the idea of the individual.
Partly.
Partly, but that's very key. And that is an idea.
Well, it has to be because it's predicating the idea of freedom. That's what it's
without the
predicating
individual, you don't have liberalism.
But without the individual, you don't have freedom either. So when you're talking about... well, I suppose, would it be helpful for me to sort of outline what I mean by liberalism? And I suppose I should caveat that, as I do in the book, with the fact that there are all sorts of definitions of liberalism, and no two liberal thinkers agree on what it means. That creates a problem, because it means that, well, as you know, on a very simplistic level, the liberals in Australia are right-wing. The liberals in America is seen as a synonym for left-wing. Liberal Democrats in this country, who knows what the hell they are. So the word liberal doesn't mean... It means a variety of different things. There's always a problem with that. So I've spent a lot of time in the book explaining what I mean by it, showing how it dovetails with other liberal thinkers and departs from others. Because, of course, there are going to be people who are liberals, self-defined liberals, who completely object to what I'm saying. But I think given the nebulousness of the term, given that, I think it's very sensible for me to define what I mean by it. And I suppose my definition fits into a very classical tradition of the liberal mindset. And the key aspects of it are freedom, first and foremost. Freedom. Now, what does freedom mean? Freedom means, yes, as you say, individual autonomy, the ability to make choices for yourself. But it also means social responsibility, looking out for the community. That's part of it too. I also bring in the idea of freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of association, freedom of belief, freedom of conscience. Meritocracy, I also think democracy is part of that. I also think equality before the law. One of the things that is completely overlooked a lot of the times with critics of liberalism is that throughout history, some of the greatest liberal thinkers have really emphasized the importance of the rule of law in order to create a cohesive society within which liberal values can flourish. Because without that, you have a free-for-all. And I suppose, if I was going to encapsulate it, it is that misapprehension of what Milton talks about, of the distinction between liberty and license. I think a lot of critics of liberalism think it's a free-for-all. They think it's about a form of anarchy. You can do whatever the hell you want.
Well, that's libertarianism, right?
Right, but I've also seen people say that that's what liberalism means, effectively, or that's the end
The
point.
Americans believe, the libertarian Americans actually believe that
they
they're
do.
Liberals.
Yeah, but they are...
in the classical liberal sense.
But they are calling for license, not liberty. And, Milton, if you're interested, wrote a sonnet about this.
Did he?
Yeah, he wrote a sonnet about the difference between liberty and license. And the reason he did it is obviously he'd written... I mean, even Paradise Lost is about the importance of liberty. It's absolutely key in Paradise Lost that Adam and Eve make their own choice, that it is not predestined. They choose to eat the fruit in the Garden of Eden. They even have an archangel turn up to explain to them why they shouldn't, and then later turn up to explain why they are facing the consequences for what they did. Mm-hmm. The idea of liberty in the Christian tradition of it is the notion of virtuous self-regulation, purging those elements within yourself self-governance, responsibility, but ultimately it has to be your choice. Humankind wouldn't have fallen. We wouldn't be in a post-lapsarian state if it was simply the case that Adam and Eve had been, it had been preordained by God that this is what they would do. No, they have to make that choice for themselves. Milton then went on to write Areopagitica, which is his tract about the importance of allowing people to be wrong. It's a defense of publishing. It's saying the state should not be censoring anything, misinformation, really, fake news.
Mm-hmm.
And he's saying the reason for that is when you put truth and falsehood on the battlefield, truth will out. And also people need to be able to have that capacity for virtuous self-regulation through reason. Crucially, he believes in reason, right? And this is what draws him to Cromwell, meritocracy. You know, this is why he... And I was getting to this point about the sonnet because he'd written a tract to defend divorce. Bear in mind, he's a Puritan thinker. He's writing at a time when this would have been quite a shocking thing to write. He didn't like his wife. Some people have accused him of trying to intellectualize a reason for, leaving his wife. And they accused him of this. They made the accusation that people make of liberals today. You just want a free-for-all. You just want people to be able to do whatever the hell they want, irrespective of what happens to other people and society as a whole. And he says, you don't get it. He says, we cry for liberty and you say license. You think we're talking about license, we're not. And that distinction between those two things, I think, is so important. If you have liberty, if you have the capacity to choose for yourself what you believe, if you are choosing for yourself what you believe, how is that an ideology? How is that not its absolute inverse? I'm putting the question to you.
Because for me, the ideological aspect comes with the idea of the individual itself. And so you have to believe that the individual exists or separate from the collective.
I don't think that's right. Look, we have different definitions of it. I don't think that's what liberalism is about. I think what it's about is the idea of the individual within a broader context of society. This is the essence of Hobbes and Leviathan, that we are part of a larger organism. In Hobbes, he talks about how we surrender some of our liberty to the state for the social good, because he believes we have a state of nature that is inherently brutish, which Locke, by the way, does not believe, and he deviates from that thereafter, which is what I'm talking about. These differences between the early liberal thinkers are quite pronounced, actually. And there have always been these differences. So I think once you see liberalism as this combination between individual autonomy with one eye on social responsibility and society as a whole, and you have a system, if you want to call it a system, that says you can do whatever you want. What Mill talks about, how, you can make your own choices and live your life as you want to live, right up until the point where you encroach on the rights of others. That's the key second part, which of course involves social responsibility. With that understanding of liberalism, I don't think it can be said to be an ideology, because it is something that says you choose what you believe. Communism says believe this, right? Marxism says you must believe this. Islam says you must believe this. Liberalism says believe what you want. So therefore, I don't think fundamentally it's ideological, understood in those terms. But I do accept your point that if you see liberalism as license, in the Miltonic sense, if you see liberalism as that free-for-all, do whatever the hell you want, and fuck the rest of the world, I apologize for swearing, then sure, that's an ideology.
You write about post-liberalism in the book, and I've alluded to this a couple of times. There's obviously a growing post-liberal movement. You cite Patrick Deenan as one of the most famous proponents of it. Why do you think people are giving up on liberalism? Why do you think the post-liberals are giving up on liberalism?
Well, I really enjoyed Patrick Deenan's books. I think, I disagree fundamentally because, in fact, it's the discussion we're having now. He sees it very much as an ideology. He sees liberalism as one of the three major ideologies of the 20th century, that communism and fascism. Now, the question was,
why do you think he's giving? Why is he giving up on liberalism? Is it because he sees it as an ideology that's failed?
I think because this is my understanding of his book, and people can tell me if I've got this wrong, that he believes that the failure of liberalism is the logical endpoint of its enactment, as in liberalism has baked within it the seeds of its own demise, the poison that will kill it ultimately. Because if liberalism succeeds, then it fails. And I think what he means by that is that, and a lot of people have made this point, is that and they point at wokeness as an example. They see wokeness as an example of unfettered liberalism. This is what happens when all you think about is your notion of progress and being kind and empowering the individual and individual rights of people to do whatever the hell they want. You get the woke. And I see, as you know from the book, I make the case that you get the woke when you don't apply the principles of liberalism, when liberalism has failed. Wokeness is a failure of liberalism, because wokeness to me is the ultimate anti-liberal point of view, and not even tacitly, like explicitly so. Mm-hmm. The major woke thinkers are robust critics of liberalism. They hate it. They think it's wrong. So I think that argument that when you pander to people's individual desires and enable them, and pander to individual feelings above what is good for the community, which does happen in wokeness, then I think that's why people have given up on liberalism, and I think why they think that actually the only solution to the problems that have emerged over the past few years is, I suppose, another form of authoritarianism, which I think is why you're getting people on the right saying, actually, I think we should ban the protests of the woke, or I think we should censor the speech of the woke, or I think we should deport people without due process, or, whatever it might be. I think you're getting that backlash because authoritarianism is easier.
Let's test the limits of your liberalism then. So you've written about Kanye West, and he shouldn't be censored, as I mentioned, his new single.
Yes.
Hitler has been censored on every streaming platform and on YouTube. The only place it remains, as far as I'm concerned, as far as I've seen, is X. And even there's reports it's been throttled in certain regions.
Yeah.
But Kneecap, the Belfast band for a place near from where you're from, they are having rather more censorship, I'd say, or there might not be technically censorship. But this band have at their gigs said "Up Hamas, up Hezbollah."
Yes.
And they've said the only good Tories are dead. Tory, kill your local MP. They are under investigation by counterterrorism command.
Yes.
At the moment, they have been dropped from several festivals.
Yes.
And venues from London and England to Germany. They have broken the law, I think, technically, in that they have supported prescribed terrorist groups. Mm-hmm. Now, in America, even though they've had their visas revoked for various reasons, you can, if you're an American citizen, because of their liberal principles, you can support Hamas or Hezbollah, but in Britain you can't. There's a prescribed group.
Yes.
Do you think it's illiberal that we prescribe support of a group like Hamas?
Okay, that's a very interesting question. Which would you like me to address first, the Kanye one or the Kneecap one?
We can start with the Kanye one. I don't have much of a question with the Kanye one, but because I think I agree with you. He shouldn't be censored.
I think with the Kanye one, the censorship draws attention to the very thing you're trying to suppress.
Right.
I mean, everyone knows about this song. People are singing it. People are dancing in clubs, doing Sieg Heils, all of the rest of it. So I don't think censorship is ever going to work when it comes to that.
Right.
And I wrote an article explaining my point of view on Substack.
What's crucial with the Kanye thing is it's not. Although he would probably get some sort of non-crime hate incident, or there's some sort of hate laws he might be breaking.
Yes,
he's not in more obvious. It's not as obvious as the case with Kneecap that he's breaking the law, like they are, or it's alleged. It seems to me that they are.
Well, they deny it. We should say
they deny, but there's videos of it.
Yeah,
right, so we can say that they deny it, but we've also seen what they've done.
Okay, well, let me give you my view on Kneecap. Firstly, I'm not a fan. I'm not familiar with their work, and I'm not really a fan of that oeuvre. Okay, so it's not my thing, so I should really put that. But what Kneecap does, and there is a similarity with the Kanye thing as well, is that these are. I mean, as you mentioned, I have family from Derry. That's where my mother is from, and I have a lot of family members and cousins who grew up there during the Troubles, and they saw a lot of this. And I know that a lot of people who experienced that stuff don't appreciate what Kneecap does, which is to kind of fetishize symbolism and imagery from the Troubles for their rap band, such as one of the members has a paramilitary style balaclava in the color of the tricolour. Now, And they use the jeeps and the accoutrements, the symbols of the Troubles for and even the name Kneecap, which is the favoured punishment beating of paramilitaries. And they say they're being satirical, but of course, if they haven't grown up, they're too young to have experienced the Troubles, right? They haven't experienced any of it, and so people who are older, who did live through that, they balk at this stuff. Because and in a way, I mean, I've written about this before, but in a way, it's quite a positive thing that the Troubles are such a distant memory that you are able to turn it into a fashion thing, and that is considered something that we don't. But
yes, that might be the case, but that's not the case for what they're saying about Hamas, Hezbollah. He was also he took a photograph of himself reading the writings of Hassan Nasrallah, the Hezbollah leader.
I was coming on to that. I remember when I was about 21, maybe, I was walking through the Bogside in Derry, and for some reason that day, you know how in the Bogside there's lots of murals, pro-IRA murals, pro-IRA graffiti. Back in those days, there was graffiti of really quite horrible stuff like "kill all police officers now," and in the Bogside, just openly, pretty much everywhere. And I was walking from once. My mother at the time was living in a place called the Brandywell, which is very near the Bogside. For some reason, I had to walk through. I think I was visiting a friend or something. And and I hadn't seen this before, but there was suddenly Palestine's stuff everywhere, and there was stuff to do with the Middle East, which to me had nothing to do with what was going on in Derry, in the Northern Ireland conflict. And ever since then, every few years, there's been a spate of it where the murals change and they become about the Middle East. And then you get a tit for tat thing. There's a place just up the road. If you go up the road from the Bogside, walk up to a place called Bishop Street, there is a Protestant enclave called the Waterside, which is on the city side, on the city side of the river, which is predominantly Catholic. But there's one Protestant enclave called the Waterside. And they always have the Union Jack curbstones, Union Jack flags, UDA insignia, all of that kind of stuff. And they, in response to this stuff going on in the Bogside, started putting up Israel flags, Star of David's. And all of a sudden I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, I was standing on the city walls looking down, and I could see the Israeli flags over there, the Palestinian flags over there. I'm like, where the hell am I? This is Northern Ireland. This has got absolutely... And you can't map on these two conflicts, which are completely different. They've got nothing in common whatsoever. But the reason why there is an attempt to map one onto the other is the idea that everything can be reduced to oppressor and oppressed. That paradigm seems to be the thing that you're able to do. So what I'm saying is there's always been within Republican circles this urge to claim, I suppose, these disparate struggles that actually have nothing to do with them. I think they're seeing what's going on in Israel-Gaza as a kind of extension of the historical conflict that's been happening in Northern Ireland. I think that's why, but I think it's based on naivety and ignorance completely. Yeah. So then you get a situation where I suppose it's seen as, I don't know, cool or trendy to endorse those kinds of violent ideas. I mean, what is it they specifically said? They said up Hezbollah, I think.
Up Hamas, up Hezbollah.
Yeah.
That was one incident.
Yeah.
Another one where he's seen reading a book. Now, as someone who's got in trouble for reading books.
Yeah, you know about that. You know about that.
Present too on that. He said on stage, you should kill your local MP. And all of this, really, they got in trouble because at Coachella last month, as their backdrop, in big white flashing lights, it was written, "Fuck Israel, free Palestine."
Yeah.
That was when everything sort of came apart. Their booking agent dropped them. But I want to go back to the original question on to the limits of your liberalism. Because
I suppose I'm not making my point clearly. What I'm saying is I don't think these things are expressed with any degree of sincerity. I think posing with the Hezbollah book, flying the various flags that they fly, saying the various statements that they... I don't think these are thought through, because I think these are to do with that historical connection between Northern Irish republicanism and other conflicts around the world.
It not being thought through is not the same as it not being sincere. And
is it not performative though? That's what I mean.
That's the question. They're on stage, right? So if they're on stage,
they're embodying. I don't think I'm making my point very clearly, so I apologize for that. I think they're trying to embody and theatricalize this kind of history of the Northern Irish Republican rebel image, I suppose. You know, there was a bar in Derry which used to have similar things, like the flags of both, and they used to sing rebel songs from the Troubles, and also they'd sing songs about Palestine or whatever the hell it was. You know, it's a kind of, when they're on stage in the balaclava doing the kind of Chucky Allah stuff, yeah, they've got no connection really, because they didn't grow up in the Troubles at all. The only connection they've got is a historical thing. I think when they then start chanting about Hezbollah and chanting about, it's the same as those guys flying a flag in the Bogside who don't know anything about it. It's part of the performance. It's part of the identity, I suppose, is what I mean.
Okay, so then just on that, their managers come out and said in their defense, instead of saying they're on stage, it's part of their...
Is that not what they said?
No, instead what they've done is they've come out and they've done a bait and switch and be like, it's not about us on stage, it's about the genocide in Gaza.
Right, okay.
Right, so they're actually very sincere in what they're saying.
Didn't they say, though, and I think it's only fair to clarify, that they did say they don't support the death of killing MPs.
They said they don't support Hamas. They said they don't support Hezbollah.
Yeah, and they apologised to the families of Joe Cox and David Amos and said, of course we don't support.
Yes, that's true, that they did do that.
And I think, again, the kill your MP thing is another performative, theatrical thing. It's the sort of thing the IRA used to say, right? One of the most chilling things I ever heard when I was in the city, the cemetery in Belfast, the one where Bobby Sands is. We were in the Republican area. I was there with a Republican who was ex-IRA, and he said, when we got Erin Eve, that was a great day. And Erin Eve was killed by the INLA in London. He's a politician in retaliation for the Bloody Sunday or whatever. And the glee when he said it made me feel really sick, and I had to get away. And I there was a genuine feeling within, particularly in Belfast, within the Republicans, that the death of an MP, of any MP, is a good thing. So I think, well, I don't know what Kneecap's intention is, but I imagine go and kill your MP is bravado harking back to a kind of Irish Republican point of view. And the fact that they have now said we absolutely don't support that suggests to me it must have been. Or are you saying that was a sincere call for people to murder MPs? Because do you know what I mean?
As you said, they have said that they don't support those things. They've given out very mixed messages, so yes. It's not clear and all. But the reason I'm bringing this up is to test the limits. And the answer I'm getting from you is, within liberalism, we should tolerate people saying on stage.
Well, I think it's complicated if you're talking about artistic expression, isn't it? Is it not possible? I mean, you've seen rock bands who embody a kind of faux psychopathic persona, but it's not real. I mean, it's very interesting when you hear.
That's actually part of the intention of rock and roll. It's kind of a valve for the darker side of our human nature.
Exactly, like when you see a Marilyn Manson video, and then you hear him talk, and he's really well spoken and seems quite friendly and nice, and you think, okay, you get it. It's a big theatrical thing, and it's to do with death and killing and and rape but it's not real because it is theatricalized. Now, I saw a performance at the Royal Vauxhall Tavern many years ago, which had bloodletting, it had sexual penetration, it had a Nazi salute, a sustained Nazi salute at the center of this performance piece. It wasn't Nazi apologism. It wasn't. It was what drag queens used to do, which was about testing the limits of tolerance. I mentioned this in my last article because I was trying to make the point that it was terrible art. Artistically, it was bad, but it wasn't to be taken at face value. I think there was a huge complication, and I understand that a lot of people will say, well, you can make that excuse. Like anyone could stand up and say, call for violence and say, oh, I was only being artistic. In fact, Michael Stone did exactly that, didn't he? Michael Stone.
I don't know who Michael Stone is.
He's the Protestant, the loyalist paramilitary who tried to murder Jerry Adams at Stormont. He had knives and explosives. He's the guy who actually attacked the cemetery after the death of the. Do you recall the IRA members who were killed in Gibraltar? Right. And then they had the funeral for those IRA members.
What year is this?
Good question. Early 90s, I think. Late 80s, early 90s. So the British Army had killed 3 IRA members in Gibraltar who were planning to murder. They were planning to bomb and kill. I think it was a military band in Gibraltar. There was then a funeral for those 3 in Belfast, attended by many, many nationalists and Republicans. Michael Stone turned up with bombs, grenades, and a gun. murdered mourners. The footage is horrifying. You can see him running towards them, throwing grenades, shooting. People died at this funeral. And then subsequently, the funeral of the people who died there, that was that famous time when the two soldiers, off-duty soldiers, accidentally drove into the middle of it and they were murdered, all on camera, filmed by them. Terrible. The whole thing is a spiral of horrific violence. But Michael Stone then, when he got out of prison, and I don't know if he was released under the terms of the Good Friday Agreement, but he got out of prison, total psychopath, but he went to Stormont to try and murder Gerry Adams and said his defense was it was performance art. That was his defense, right? Mm-hmm. Now, that doesn't really ring true. But what you might say is, just because you're standing on a stage, just because you're saying it's a theatrical performance, doesn't mean you can get away with saying anything else. But then that's what Humza Yousaf was saying when he introduced the hate crime bill in Scotland. He said, because you remember there was a section of that was about the public performance of a play. And he said, why? Well, neo-Nazis might write a play to try and radicalise people.
It's also the case in Scotland. I mean, you'll know the details of the joke law, the not being able to joke or whatever those laws are. But
exactly. Well, I think
it's also the Count Dankula.
The Count Dankula case is another example.
That you wrote about in the book.
I mean, he actually did get a criminal record for...
He spent the night in the cell, I think.
And they fined him £800 in the end. He has got a criminal record now for a joke. It was a joke video, but they said that he was using humour as a cover for neo-Nazism.
Right.
Okay, so... And this is complicated, but this is why I suppose I'm steering it away from liberalism way, but maybe not.
No, this is really important. This is a border case for liberalism.
It is. The artistic, I mean, my instincts always, and I think you'll know from reading the book, is you protect artistic freedom, even when it appears to be a reification of some of the most bleak aspects of humanity, because I don't believe that art is just about putting out what's nice and beautiful. Sometimes it's about delving into the very darkest elements of humanity. So my instinct will always be to err on the side of performers and their rights to say whatever they want.
Right.
I don't believe, and also I think this is supported if we think in terms of what we mean by incitement to violence. Okay, so they said this thing, which I absolutely abhor, and they've now said they didn't mean it, implying that's part of the performance, part of the image, the IRA image the faux IRA thing that they put on. Right, fine. But did that statement in of itself incite violence? Does it fulfill what the Americans have, which is the Brandenburg test? Is it likely to incite violence? Was it intended to incite violence? And
did it directly incite violence?
Did it directly incite violence? Was that an imminent possibility? In all of those, we answer that no, it didn't. Right. It doesn't meet the threshold for the Brandenburg test, and I think the Brandenburg test is a fairly safe test to apply when it comes to this principle.
But it's
the
also
downside. Sorry, just very quickly. The downside of saying that artists get a free pass, I suppose, is what I'm saying, is that it is possible, as the Michael Stone case proves, for people to use art and comedy and the rest and creativity to mask and shield genuine violent intention. That is a possibility, and that is a downside of what I'm saying. I suppose the way I would look at it is on balance, broadly speaking, right? It's the same with the free speech argument. I get the argument that if you allow some awful people to call for violence or try to encourage their followers to commit acts of violence, that's horrible. But if it is a question of the occasional, egregious, horrific instance of that kind compared to empowering the state to be able to determine what speech is criminal and what speech is legal, that, to me, on balance, is the greater threat.
Mm-hmm.
That's, I suppose, where I would come down.
Yes. As you speak there, I think of the two-tier. You wrote a recent piece about some of the infringements on free speech in Britain, and you bring the case of Paul Gascoigne, the legendary England football player.
People have forgotten about this.
In this 2018, he's on stage in Wolverhampton, I think at the Civic Hall, made a joke at a black security guard, and said, "Can you smile so I can see you?" or something like that. And
joke.
He was fined and made to pay compensation to the player. But he was on stage.
Yeah.
So is he protected by the kind of artist? Does he give an artistic license for those sort of jokes, or is this just an example of two-tier?
I don't think he should have been prosecuted for that.
Okay,
I mean that was a joke that Dame Edna Everage had made many years before. It's not a new joke. He was just saying an old joke, But then, as you know, my free speech position is that you should be able to say racist things anyway.
So just off the stage then.
So off the stage, yeah.
Do you think that off stage one should be able to verbally support prescribed terrorist groups like Hamas?
My feeling is yes.
So you think the law is wrong there?
I think it is wrong. I don't believe in breaking the law, and I don't advocate that. But I do think, on balance, it is better to enable people to out themselves for what they are. If someone is supporting terrorists, if there are terrorist supporters in our society, I want to know who they are. And the best way is to let them speak. Right? I think that's... Now, obviously, if you're engaged in actual terrorist activity, funding terrorism or doing anything of that kind...
Material support, yeah.
Yeah, material support, obviously, has to be criminal. I mean, obviously. But isn't it better that we know who these people are? Isn't it better that, that to me is a more valuable thing?
Mm-hmm. Well, I will say you are one of the most principled of the sort of quote unquote anti-woke crowd to make that position, because few are prepared to say that out loud, I think.
Well, I mean, I think it would be inconsistent of me not to.
Yeah. So, Andrew, before we go behind the paywall,
where we're going to do all sorts
talk more about free speech, and
things.
We're going to talk about the very, edgy issues of Islam in Britain and can liberalism deal with Islam in Britain, or Islamism maybe, more fair. I want to do a quick game.
Go on then.
Of liberal or not liberal. This was inspired reading your book. I want you to tell me, and also this conversation, whether or not these individuals are liberal or not liberal. It's a quick fire game.
Okay.
It was between this and Never Have I Ever, and I'm sure you'd prefer to
I
play
don't
this.
know that game. What's that one?
That's for another time.
Oh, we'll do that in the
yeah, we'll do it behind the paywall.
Behind the paywall, yeah.
So, liberal or not liberal? Is Keir Starmer a liberal or not a liberal?
Not liberal.
Is Sir Ed Davey, head of the Liberal Democrats, a liberal?
No.
Is Kemi Badenoch, the head of the Conservative Party, a liberal?
That's a very good question. She's been very strong on the freedom issue, and she's been very strong on the culture war issue. And she's fallen down on the liberal side of those arguments again and again. So on balance, from what I've seen, yes.
Is Nigel Farage, head of Reform UK, a liberal?
That's a very good question. He supports freedom of speech.
Yes.
He supports due process. He doesn't believe in what a number of Americans are now calling for, which is just deportation without due process. He would oppose that, wouldn't he, I think?
They haven't said exactly how they're going to deport the illegals in Britain, but they have said that they intend to do it.
Yes. Can you think of, to help me out here, can you think of anything that Farage has said that would fall into the illiberal camp? Or anything that people have accused him of being a liberal for?
The only thing, but it might take the conversation in a whole other way, is his recent calling for British Steel to be nationalised.
Yes.
But then we're getting into economic liberalism, which is, I think, a different conversation.
It is a different conversation
we've been having. That jumps to mind.
Well, my answer to that question is I don't know.
Donald Trump, liberal or not liberal?
On balance, again, seems to be mostly liberal. Except, actually, no, I take that back. He said too many things that are outright illiberal. For instance, actually more than twice, I think, he said that people who burn the American flag should go to jail for a year. I think he's actually been specific about how long they should go to jail for. I don't think you can be a liberal and say that. I think burning a flag, if it's your own property, is your own business, and that's part of freedom of expression. He's also said some weird things like he wants to tighten up the libel laws, make it easier to sue his critics. So I think, so I take back and yet he's pushed through some very, very liberal measures, hasn't he? So I think he's probably one of those who is broadly liberal with a few quite serious blind spots. Is that a fair response?
I think it's a very fair response. Do you think that Joe Biden was a liberal?
No.
There was no hesitation there.
Well, because the entire Biden administration was pushing through illiberal measures, the woke movement. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't know if you've got Kamala Harris and Tim Walz on that list, but,
I won't bother because I think I know what the answer is.
Yeah, well, I mean, Tim Walz explicitly said in that presidential debate, the vice presidential debate with J.D. Vance, that he didn't think the First Amendment should cover hate speech. In fact, I think he said he doesn't think it does. Well, that's obviously deeply illiberal, isn't it? You know, any government that supports hate speech laws, censorship in any way, is by definition not liberal.
Back to England. Was Tony Blair a liberal?
No.
Was Maggie Thatcher a liberal?
No.
Is Sadiq Khan a liberal?
Definitely not.
Is Alistair Campbell a liberal?
No.
Is Rory Stewart a liberal?
No, far from it.
Okay, are there any liberals?
Well, I mean, I think the closest we've come to it is Kemi, and I don't know enough about what she believes about various things.
Kemi Bednar.
I met her a couple of times. She seems really nice.
Yeah.
But that's not what liberalism means, is it? If it was just being nice. So no, I will, in that case, I'll put myself in the I do not know enough to make a sound judgment. But I am better when I have specific examples of illiberalism that I can say, okay, you're definitely not a liberal. And I think pretty much, well, I suppose, can I sum it up this way? I don't think any major political party in the Western world is liberal.
Wow.
Well,
there's food for thought.
I just don't think they're... If you, in my book, when, you know, I do the bullet points of what I think liberalism entails, not a list of rules, as you've implied, but what it entails if you are a liberal, I just don't see any government fulfilling all of those things.
Well, let's discuss that behind the paywall.
That is a cliffhanger. What a cliffhanger. You're good at this.
When's the book out? Where can people find it? And where can people find you?
The book is called The End of Woke, How the Culture War Went Too Far and What to Expect from the Counter-Revolution. And the book is available from May the 29th. But it is already available on pre-order. And I would urge people to pre-order because that helps my numbers.
Yeah, let's do that.
And also, if you pre-order it, you get it on the day of its release, not a few days after.
And it's worldwide? Available in America?
Good question. Actually, I believe that in America, it's out on Kindle and Audible with my voice on the thing because I sat and read the whole thing out.
Dulcet tones.
Oh, I couldn't bear it. And because you have to speak really slowly, unnaturally slowly when you're doing an audiobook, and it takes ages. But it is my voice. And then, or you can buy the book. Yeah, you can't buy the physical copy in America yet. That will be a number of months away. But you can get it on Kindle. And in the UK, you can get it on Kindle, Audible, and the hard physical
Any
copy.
translations of it?
Too early for that.
Too early.
Give it time.
Give it time. Andrew Doyle, I'll see you on the other side of the paywall at winstonmarshall.co.uk, where we will tuck into the juicy topic of Islam, as well as your cliffhanger about liberal parties, or the lack thereof. Andrew Doyle, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching the Winston Marshall Show. That was Andrew Doyle. If you want to support the show, remember all you have to do is press subscribe. If you do that, I can have more phenomenal guests exploring the issues you want to hear about that the mainstream media won't touch. And if you go over to winstonmarshall.co.uk, as well as an extended conversation with Andrew, you'll find exclusive videos, articles, content, and ad-free viewing. But until next time, be well.